He has his slides up already, so take it away, Jeff. John, we can't hear you if you're talking.
Okay, let's try again. Bob, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Now I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll start over, and let's also determine, verify. You can see the slides?
Yes, I can. We see the slides too.
Okay, we'll start over then. Thank you, Bob. Okay, again, like to say thanks very much to Bob for moderating this session, and Jeff Gonzalez for organizing, as well as for everybody who's participating in this event today. And as Bob was noting, we've seen some special challenges arising over the last year plus now throughout the federal statistical system. And this is a good opportunity for us to step back and think about both what's been accomplished, but also insights that may offer for the future. In doing that, we would suggest that a good place to start is to think about a general operating model in a very broad schematic form for a statistical organization, and talk about a couple of major features of that. First feature I'd like to highlight is that anytime we are dealing with any of our statistical agencies, we're thinking about multiple dimensions of quality, risk, and cost, and thinking about trade-offs among those dimensions. And this is something we especially have seen over the past year as we've seen major changes in the underlying landscape. Said, okay, how do we deal with those while at the same time remaining true to the fundamentals that Bob was referencing before in terms of producing high quality objective statistical information for stakeholders, including key policymakers and the general public. So fleshing that out a little bit, it's worthwhile to think about these dimensions of quality, risk, and cost. When we think about quality, we very frequently focus a lot of attention on accuracy, mean squared error or performance of interval estimators, but it's very much worthwhile, and we've seen brought to the fore in the last year, the importance of other dimensions of quality, like granularity. At what level of either geographical or temporal granularity are we producing results? How quickly are we getting something out, as well as questions like relevance and accessibility. We also have a lot of questions about risk that have been brought to the fore over the last year. And I think Bob has some questions prepared on the risk topic for our follow-up discussion at the end. So I'll just acknowledge risk for the moment. In addition, we're very much aware of cost attached to operations as well as design. And think about cash, often that's the primary cost that we hear people discussing. But it's also very much worthwhile to think about other dimensions, other resources that we can put under the cost umbrella. And one that's received special attention last year is the time to launch. How long does it take from the time that we identify a particular statistical information need to the time we're able to scale up to full-scale production and get published results out to the public for the public to have insights into what we're observing. All of those dimensions of cost are very much worthwhile to think about. Again, we deal with trade-offs for all of those. When we're thinking about how to balance those trade-offs, we consider a lot of different design factors like underlying methodology, as well as technology, administration, and also it's worthwhile to think about data sources as another somewhat distinct balancing. And it's also very much worthwhile to think about underlying environmental factors and how they have changed. Can involve changes in stakeholder priorities, and can also involve questions about public trust related either to our data collection process or public trust related to the numbers that we publish. As we dig further into that, we think more about our stakeholders and their information needs. It's worthwhile to think about distinct classes of inferential questions that our stakeholders may either explicitly or implicitly be wanting to explore. In many cases, they're interested in very simple descriptive characteristics, usual means, proportions, totals, and so on. But we've seen, especially in the past year, as we've seen organizations and individuals dealing both with the pandemic itself and also related effects through our economy and other societal characteristics, there's interest in going beyond that to say, can we say something about relationships in greater depth among the different observations that we have, sometimes for interest in themselves, sometimes because they would feed into some type of predictive model. In addition, as we have been exploring over the last 2+ years, the implications of the Foundations of Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, we've seen a lot of greater interest in causality and notions going beyond causality into ideas about perceived control. And Danny Goroff, in his Links lecture last December, had some very interesting insights to offer on that. His basic suggestion was that much of the Foundations Act was fundamentally premised on notions of causality. And that makes us rethink, to the extent that we are trying to go down that path, it makes us rethink in a great deal of depth questions about justification and whether we have sound scientific justification for inference within each of these 5 classes. And that in turn means we need to be able to spell out in some depth, how do we account for which sources of variability we're in fact considering when we make an inference statement, and what are the related underlying conditions? It involves both deep technical issues, but also very practical issues when a policymaker or somebody else comes back and says, just how sure are we about these results? Just how broadly can we apply those results? Deep technical work, but also very practical in terms of impact. We need to think about the resulting policy applications of that and how the changing landscape that we've encountered over the last year plus leads to some changes in how we try to address those issues and the empirical results that we obtain. And finally, we were asked in the preparations for this, for each of the speakers to say a little bit about prospects for interagency collaboration. I think this opens up a lot of really good opportunities, and some of our subsequent speakers are going to go in depth, but I'll start with just 2 cases. First case, in which I think it'd be very beneficial to have lots of interagency collaboration, is for us jointly to think in depth about practical trade-offs among the multiple dimensions of quality, risk, and cost that we've been considering over the last couple of minutes. And also, how do we communicate with our stakeholders about that? The more we can have common ground and a common language for communication, the better off we're going to be. And a couple of examples of this that have come to the fore in the last year is discussion with stakeholders about trade-offs between timeliness and accuracy. And another one involves trade-offs between relevance and cost. Those are evergreen. We've gotten a lot of insights in the last year, but a lot more to do. Second area in which it's worthwhile to think in depth about interagency collaboration, the questions about inferential questions within the 5 classes that I referenced a moment ago. Can we find some common structure and common ground across agencies and across stakeholder groups, both in terms of the underlying technical work and also in terms of understanding our stakeholders' expectations about notions of causality and control, and ways in which we can communicate clearly with those stakeholders about the extent to which our data provide deep insights in those areas and the extent to which we have to highlight important limitations of that information in a given case. With that, I'll turn things back to Bob.
Thank you, John, for that presentation. Remember, folks, if you have any questions as a speaker is presenting, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll be tracking those. If you prefer to wait, then when all the speakers are done, we'll open it up to the floor and folks can ask in person if they like. So we'll turn now to Linda Young from the National Agricultural Statistical Service at USDA. Take it away, Linda.
All right. Yeah, I think you can see it now. Is that correct?
I cannot. I can hear you, but I don't see it.
Okay, well, that's a first step, but let's try to get the second step in here as well.
Okay. Progress, but challenges
Yeah.
remain.
Yes. All right. Let's see. Oops, that's not going to do it. Let's see.
There we go. Oh, we had it for a moment there.
Yeah, let me do this. And this is after practice. Just imagine what it had been otherwise.
There you go. We got
Can
you.
you see it fine?
Yep, sure can.
All right. As Bob mentioned, some of us developed new products, and others of us simply, not simply, but actually responded in the wake of COVID to try to keep the quality of our statistics as strong as possible. And I'm going to talk about that portion of it, the response, because that's primarily what NAS did. And we'll be doing that in the context of the June area survey, or what we refer to as the JAS. This is one of the two largest and most costliest surveys NAS conducts on an annual basis. The other is the Agricultural Resource Management Survey, which we do jointly with ERS, the Economic Research Service. This is used, survey results are used in a host of ways. It's used to measure undercoverage of the NAS list frame for numerous surveys, to develop the sample design for objective yield, to estimate the number of farms and land and farms, and these are but a few of the use cases. The sampling frame is the NAS area frame, and prior to 2020, this survey had always been conducted face-to-face. With the timing of the onset of the pandemic, we did not have time to revamp in time to collect data in 2020, so we canceled it. And we realized how valuable the JAS is in ensuring the quality, and we really struggled in some places to still meet our standards. So the agency committed to doing this survey in 2021. In October of 2020, NAS made the decision to move forward with the 2021 June area survey using no face-to-face interviews. We felt the decision had to be made this early if we were to be able to evolve the processes to meet this challenge. So with an area frame, one of the first things that has to be done prior to the start of data collection is figuring out who should be responding in the area of interest. Each of our primary sampling units is about a square mile, a section of land for those familiar in agriculture. And I have a picture here, in the colored, brightly colored spots would be basically the units within this primary sampling unit. And to identify these, we brought together in a new tool, satellite map, the outlines of the sampling units, as well as administrative data from our sister agency, the Farm Service Agency, Report All, and Acre Value, as well as any other source that we could bring together that would make it easy to look these up. And then we identified, in this case, a different color represents a different tract, a tract being a unit of land with a single operation. And so we have the bright green is one, and then we have the two others. So we have three different producers that we're going to try to target in this sampling unit. Data collection had to be fully revised. A package was mailed to respondents a pre-survey letter. The packet had a pre-survey letter, an informational copy of the questionnaire, a county map, and a zoomed-in area of the sample unit. The zoomed-in area of the sample unit, an example, is on the left here. We did cognitive and usability testing to ensure that we could actually, the interviewer and the producer could agree on what piece of land they're talking about. And you can't see it here, but across the top are letters and down the sides are numbers. So we could say, all right, E3. Do you see that piece of land in E3? It's in the upper left corner of that red square. And they could begin to communicate. And the study showed that this does seem to work well. Our data collection is going to be via Caddy, so we'll be all phone data collection. And our concerns, of course, are response rate and data quality. So we are allowing each of the interviewers, if they can't get a response from a particular producer, to drive around and visit those areas for which there's no response. They will not go face-to-face, but they can observe whether this 40 acres within that sample unit appears to be agricultural. If in the South, by early June, we should be able to tell what crop it is. And if it's in the North and the crop hasn't yet emerged, most of these places are planted by that time, and the interviewer may go and scratch in the ground and try to find a seed to help identify where the crop may be corn or soybeans, as an example. We also found an opportunity for a new product and are putting this in place for 2021. The track boundaries are identified, are shown in the map on the left. And so we have 5 producers in this area. Prior to 2021, an interviewer had a map of each sample unit, and they would take a greased pencil and outline each tract and put a letter on it and ensure that every piece of land in that sample unit had been explored and data collected if appropriate. At the end, we would know that there are these A, B, C, D, and E producers, and on the questionnaire, we would also have the letters A to E. But at the end, those maps weren't retained. So all we knew is that those 5 questionnaires came from this sample unit, and we didn't have a way to connect the exact tract of land with the person who had responded. Building upon that first picture I showed you where we were identifying producers in the first place, we have a team that is expanding that so that in the field offices, staff can digitize these maps at the end of data collection. This is something that the agency's been interested in trying to do for more than 20 years. Various efforts have taken place. And so this is one very positive outcome that we've had from the pandemic. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Linda, very much for that presentation. I will restrain myself from making a field data collection joke, because I know you've heard it 1,000 times. I think we are turning now to Jennifer Parker from the National Center for Health Statistics. So Jennifer, take it away, please.
Thank you, Bob. Can you see my my screen here?
Yes, we can.
Oh, yay. Practice, you know, it was helpful. So good afternoon, everyone. As Bob said, I'm Jennifer Parker, the Director of the Division of Research and Methodology at the National Center for Health Statistics. And I'm very happy to be here with everybody participating on this panel this afternoon. So for those of you who don't know, NCHS is the principal statistical agency for the Department of Health and Human Services, and we're located within CDC. So as part of CDC, we have had a role in many of the department's COVID-related health data released to the public, including information from death and birth certificates, hospital encounter data from our hospital care surveys, and other health measures from surveys, including healthcare access, mental health during the pandemic, and work loss due to illness. I've circled the mortality data as one of our more prominent products. This slide shows provisional death counts over time through April 17th, which was last weekend, for the coronavirus. You know, vital statistics are a state system, and we rely on reporting from each of the states for our publications. The shaded area here on the right reflects the undercount expected from the reporting lags. And there are several other data disseminations for mortality on our webpage, including model-based estimates of excess deaths and reports of mortality by race, sex, and age. However, I actually don't work directly in the mortality area, so I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes on the expanded use of online surveys for collecting health data. Circled here are our data releases from the Household Pulse Survey and from our Research and Development Survey. Briefly, many of you are probably aware of the Household Pulse Survey, and it was mentioned on John's slides at the beginning. The Household Pulse Survey is a survey conducted by the Census Bureau in collaboration with several other agencies. Currently, as you know, last month, there are a little over 60,000 respondents in a 2-week reporting period with a response rate of about 7 to 8%. The NCHS health content for the Household Pulse Survey has included mental health measures, health insurance status, and reduced access to health care, or as it says here, foregone care due to the pandemic. The Research and Development Survey is a platform that the Division of Research and Methodology has been using for several years to conduct web-based surveys to understand how survey questions perform. And it's also being used for statistical methods research. With the pandemic, NCHS's survey operations were disrupted, either out of the field completely or shifting modes, and either way, not really releasing data in real time. RANDS was used to collect information that could be turned around relatively quickly. It was no small feat, but we were able to collect data in June and early July and release estimates called experimental estimates in August. RAND's response rates, around 20 to 25%, are still lower than those of our core surveys, but are a little higher than Pulse. And for us, this was the first time NCHS had released its own experimental estimates. So looking ahead, the experience with the online data collections is having us reconsider the way we release data. Currently, the National Health Interview Survey, for example, one of our principal surveys for population health data, collects data over the entire calendar year. Data from the first quarter, data collected in January through March, are released as preliminary estimates in September. Data for the entire year are released the following year in the summer. We are considering including online survey data with a new set of estimates called advanced estimates. They would be data collected early in the year and perhaps released in April or May. But this is just one hypothetical release schedule. And a lot of decisions need to be made, and we're working on these now. And many of these are in the framework described by John in the first talk. You know, which health outcomes will have the highest utility for advanced estimates? Can we provide reasonable advanced estimates for subgroups? What are the trade-offs among the different data collection strategies and platforms? Can we combine the internet data with our large population health surveys to improve the estimates? And if so, what are the best ways of doing that? And finally, very importantly, how can we communicate the strengths and limitations of different releases to our different audiences? If data from the advanced estimates don't line up with our preliminary estimates and our final estimates, we need to be able to communicate why that's so and what the trade-offs are and what the value of each of these releases will be. And I'm going to stop here, and I look forward to your questions and the discussion.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Okay, so we'll turn now to our final speaker in the panel, Spiro Stefano, Administrator of the Economic Research Service at the USDA.
Okay, let me put this in presentation mode. All right, we okay here?
We see you and hear you, yes.
Excellent, thanks. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for the Washington Statistical Society, to Jeff for organizing it, for Bob for hosting. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm the new administrator for the Economic Research Service at USDA. I came on board in August, and I'm really pleased to be here. Let's see here. So we have had two types of responses. We've had some new responses and some ongoing activity in place. And so let me give you a sense of what we've done that's new. The first is the creation of a rapid response team, COVID-19 rapid response team. And the notion here is to provide the timely economic analysis to help the policymakers understand the current impact and status of the epidemic. Part of this response is to have a working paper series with some initial research coming out. It is kind of a novel vehicle for us because we tend to have very thoroughly reviewed material before it goes out, and we've had to create this expedited series here. So we've had, oh boy, about 6-8 papers out already on this, on a wide range of topics. Also, what's new? Well, we heard about the Household Pulse Survey. We joined that partnership here with Census Bureau, National Center for Health Statistics, and several other federal agencies. And we've been inserting questions on food insufficiency during the pandemic. We also have acquired weekly updates to food retail sales and food service transactions. This is proprietary data that we've picked up, and it's a six-figure data product, and we're going to continue collecting that now into the second year. And so these are giving us some really useful insights here on how the pandemic and other stressors to the food system are starting to emerge. What's ongoing? Well, we have these commodity outlook reports. Okay, what are those? Well, we look at livestock, we look at grains and oil seeds and a number of things. Corn ethanol is another big topic. Okay, I've put up a slide here, and this is something that's called a chart of note. That's how it's published. We put these out, just one chart with a brief paragraph describing what's going on. So everyone heard about how the pandemic impacted slaughterhouses. Well, here you see it in mid-May. And you see the climb, that the yellow is the 2020 pattern, and you see it climb up higher than historical patterns. What was that? Well, that was, there was a backup of slaughter capacity because slaughterhouses had to slow down production. Folks, their workers were out ill, and animals started to get larger and larger. The response was, they came in at a little higher weight. And really the big news story here is that the weights were even higher because there was an adaptation by farmers, hog farmers, to keep their animals alive without having them gain a lot more weight. And so they adjusted their rations. And you started to see this pattern. You see how quickly it adjusted. This was published in September, so you don't see the pattern continue beyond that calendar time. But that's just one example of what we've been putting out. We created a COVID topics page, and the URL is here. You can see a number of items there. It'll have the working papers. It'll have these charts of note like this one. And there are actually 41 charts of note related to COVID. And so that's one way we try to kind of keep pace and see what's going on. Another item is something we put out every year, is called the Rural America at a Glance. It's just a compendium of what the rural sector looks like in terms of different economic, socio-demographic issues. And this year we focused on the pandemic and on COVID, And here we had a full report that looked at all those conditions in the rural areas. Another item ongoing, we always look at food taken away from home versus food at home. And as you can imagine, a lot more food taken at home. What are the consequent impacts? Food retailers, other food production activities, how much time is spent. So these are examples. There's a chart here, just kind of give you a sense of how we start to present that information here to policymakers, to other interested folks. And what do we expect to see in the coming year? Well, we're tracking it, by the week. So we'll get a sense of it because this is all new for us, for all of us. Another thing that's ongoing is our food apps. It's the National Food Acquisition Purchase Survey, and it's linking different types of data, integrating information from several sources, looks at food, nutrition, economics, environment, and it's now linked to health. And we have our Ask US panel, which is an interagency effort. And it's been going on for several years, aimed at these high quality survey panel to track public opinion, also do some survey methodology testing. And with that, we're happy to take your questions and hope you visit some of these sites for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Spiro, and thank you to all of our presenters. I thought that was actually a really fascinating set of presentations that very nicely illustrated, one of my points in the introduction, which was that our stat agencies are very different, and they have different resources. They have different, they have a core mission, but they have different stakeholders and products, and the way that they responded to the pandemic was also very different, and it was definitely very inspiring, I will say, from OMB to see all of these different agencies step up and be creative in different ways to solve this emerging problem. So as the host and discussant, I'm going to give my thoughts on these presentations and kind of the underlying themes that I saw, and then we can turn it over to the attendees here for questions for the panel. And if everyone is too shy or we can't figure out the technology to get questions in real time, then I have some pre-prepared questions that I can field them. So obviously these presentations, like I said, it was inspiring to watch. The shows, it's like an inspirational poster, right? That every challenge presents opportunities, and all of these agencies really created opportunities to rethink how they engage and respond to policymakers, how they are collecting data, how they're defining and considering quality factors within their agencies, and then how they interact and coordinate with other federal agencies, statistical agencies, and program agencies in order to create new insights or create new efficiencies and improve their products. And I really think the pandemic has shown that a more cooperative system is a more resilient and flexible system. And this is something that John brought up in his talk, and several of the other speakers brought up kind of indirectly as this increased level of collaboration and cooperation. I think we've seen some real successes in the last year. The Federal Committee on Statistical Methodology is as always, but it kicked into very high gear over the last couple of years, producing very useful tools for all federal agencies on statistical methodology, including a data protection toolkit and guidance on how to communicate and consider the quality of blended data sources under this broader conception of quality beyond just accuracy and precision. And following up on the goals of the Evidence Act, the statistical system is working on ways to make it easier for the statistical agencies to access and acquire data from other agencies, and then also to allow access to their own data sets to researchers within the government and external to the government. So I was asked to talk about what I see as the future of the statistical system moving forward, especially as influenced by the COVID pandemic. And I think what struck me most and what has been kind of one of the largest transformations over the last year is this idea of relevance to policymakers, and especially from my seat in OMB, helping agencies. Well, I play kind of a go-between, frequently between policymakers, administration officials, and then career staff at the statistical agencies, and we talk about all these trade-offs and walking these lines, and that's one that I spend a lot of my time on, is walking this line between relevance and independence. And I think the statistical system has appropriately always been a bit walled off from policymakers, right? And the reasons for that are, you can read about in the Principles and Practices and Statistical Policy Directive #1 on independence, but the value of the statistical system's products relies almost entirely on the trust of the public and consumers that the data that they're producing is objective and unbiased and untainted by any kind of political considerations. On the other hand, we found that the statistical system plays an enormously important role in providing data that decision makers need, and sometimes they need it on quick turnaround. So how do you thread this needle? I think to me the first screen, the way that I initially approach it is that it is not inappropriate for policymakers and officials to communicate their needs to the statistical system, and it is not inappropriate for the statistical system to respond to those needs. So it's not inappropriate to dedicate resources to responding to needs as expressed by policy officials. What is inappropriate is any kind of influence on the way that things are measured, the way that data is collected, or the way that results are disseminated or distributed from the stat agency. So there are areas where the stat agencies need absolute, independence, and there cannot even be the perception that there is any influence. But really, one of the if you look at Principles and Practices, one of the principles is to be relevant. If you look at Stat Policy Directive #1, the 4 fundamental responsibilities of a stat agency, or as codified in the Evidence Act, a fundamental responsibility is that the stat agencies should be producing relevant statistics. So it's something that I think tends to be obviously a difficult line to walk, but it's an important one, and it's one that I saw over the last year. The stat agencies really step up and give a lot of careful thought to, how do you respond to emerging needs in a way that maintains your credibility and independence. And I was very impressed with the way that all of the statistical agencies were able to comport themselves during those challenges. Even small agencies, some agencies have a lot of experience with these kinds of issues, and some agencies are less experienced in it. But I think we've all gotten much better at it over the last year. So I mentioned that's kind of my first screen, is that it's not inappropriate for the policymakers to express priorities and needs, right? But I will say, within that, obviously there can be problems there too. You don't want policy officials telling agencies that they must produce a certain statistic or that they may not produce another statistic, right? Again, you need some level of independence there, and so even within that kind of rough screen, there can be delicate lines that one needs to walk. So I think that is a long way of saying that is my view for the future, is that we will continue to walk that line. There will continue to be emerging needs, things like the household pulse, advanced estimates, these quick turnaround, collaborative, highly relevant, flexible tools are not going to go away. There will be, if anything else, more demand for these sorts of things. And I think stat agencies, all of us really, will just need to get a little better practiced at navigating these waters. But it's been really exciting to see how well we've done so far. And with that, I will conclude my remarks, and we can turn to questions here. I see a couple came in while I was talking. While I kind of process those and think about whether how to phrase them to the panelists, I'm going to give one of my canned questions to John Elting, because I think it will set the stage for some of the other questions we might see. So as John mentioned, I did warn him that I was going to ask him to talk a little bit more about risk, because I think that's another important part of the future of the statistical system. You know, we are always, he has a framework that I've seen him present several times that's always really resonated very deeply with me, where you take very important methodological decisions and you decompose them into components of quality, cost, and risk. And I think cost has always been fairly easy, right? We can attach dollars to a sample size. Quality, we're getting much better at over the last 5 years that I've been at OMB and paying attention. So we are expanding beyond just accuracy and precision and considering timeliness and relevance and things like that in a much more integrated and thoughtful way. But risk, I still see as being a very difficult challenge for statistical agencies and other scientific agencies to grapple with. You know, I think there are risks like re-identification or disclosure, or putting out wildly inaccurate numbers because you're in a rush to get something out that's timely and relevant. And the stat system has historically treated these risks as kind of infinite, right? I mean, if some major disclosure of data happens, then that's completely unacceptable, and there's no amount of caution that's inappropriate to prevent that. So I was hoping John could talk a little bit about how he thinks about risk and how to insert risk in a meaningful way into these conversations where you're balancing quality and cost and risk. John.
Okay, thanks, Bob. And quick sound check. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. Okay. Thanks, Bob, for that general framing of worthwhile to bear in mind is there are several different notions of risk. They're all very important. And it's worthwhile to think as we work that through about the general question about when we say, gee, I am concerned about risk, to spell out combination of what exactly is the event that we're what are the underlying factors that drive that event, in some ways increase the probability of that event occurring. And third, what are the ways in which we can and should be responding to those events when they occur? First of all, in detecting them. Second, in mitigating the impact on our stakeholders. Third, in some sense, recovering from that. In all of that, it's very much worthwhile to borrow from a wide range of literature related to risk management, and I'll highlight just a few of those points there. The first one is that there is a lot of discussion in the literature about risks that arise from, quote, complex and tightly coupled systems. It's a term of art within that literature. And it basically boils down to saying we often have many moving parts in a complex system. And if something goes wrong, can we detect those in time, or do things spin out of control? And there's obviously many intermediate points related to that. Second related point at a general level is that it's worthwhile to borrow from our colleagues in engineering who have developed notions related to, quote, fault-tolerant designs. The idea is that failures will happen. And the crucial question is, can we detect it, find out the full trajectory of the mitigation and recovery? And that showed up, for example, when last spring, when we had a major disruption in our CAPI, computer-assisted personal interviewing work that many of our agencies involved with. Linda, for example, is referencing some of that for agriculture. And disruption. We no longer go out and do that type. How do we move to telephone or online collection? How long does it take us to get there? What do we know about the quality characteristics of the resulting alternative procedures, translating effectively for us into mode effects? So those are some general ideas that are worthwhile to think about. Digging a little bit further into lessons learned for the future, It's worthwhile to think about several dimensions. I'll touch on just two of them here in the interest of time. One is that many of the risks that we see within our agencies center on the question of system development, implementation, and maintenance. When we want to have a very robust and flexible system, we are, again, going to be dealing with many moving parts. And it's worthwhile to look in depth at both literature and especially at robust practice in those areas. Within that literature, you will especially see a lot of discussion of so-called agile compared to waterfall approaches to system development. To a substantial degree, both of those approaches are focused on a combination of risk and cost management. And it's worthwhile, especially when you see advocacy for so-called agile approaches. I'm a big fan of using that approach, but it's important to be sure that there is not a misperception that agile means you don't have to do as much homework. In fact, if you are going to be doing agile work, it requires a great deal of homework to be truly effective. And there's, again, a large body of practice and literature working that out. Second point I'd like to highlight involves the interface between quality and risk. You see many different cases where this shows up within our statistical community. One is the question of inferential usage of our data. How do we ensure that people get solid information from our statistical information we publish, but we steer them away or have appropriate buffers to reduce the risk of overinterpretation or misinterpretation, especially in the area of causality that I was referencing before. Second area involves privacy protection, and that again would warrant its own separate talk. But for the moment, it's worthwhile to acknowledge that we are seeing a changing landscape that involves very important changes in the risks of re-identification of a given respondent, the impact of the sensitivity of a particular item that may be then associated with that re-identified respondent. There is a lot of literature, again, in the area of so-called tiered access and the quote 5 safes, unquote, as ways of approaching all of that, as well as very deep scientific work related to differential privacy and related approaches. For the discussion of tiered access, I'd especially highlight some really nice presentations that Cynthia Clark and others involved with COPAFs did about a year ago. Really good place to start for that, as well as quite a body of literature, including some people at Census Bureau and elsewhere who've been doing quite a bit of work in the area of differential privacy. With that, we'll turn things back to Bob. Those are just a highlight of a few ideas of risk management.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate that. I think this is an issue that a lot of us are kind of just starting to wrap our heads around, but one that I know that you have been very active and thinking very hard about for a long time. So I will kind of, on behalf of the statistical system, thank you for your leadership in this issue, because I think it will be increasingly important as time goes on. So I had a chance to read through some of the questions. A couple of them for me that I think I can knock out pretty quickly. So we had a question about the household pulse survey, and the person wanted to know, is the potential selection bias of cases in the math not having email or cell numbers related to addresses been analyzed? So for context, the household pulse is very quick turnaround, so you're not mailing invitation letters out. This is done through text and email. And so the master address file at Census is arguably the most complete and accurate frame that we've got in the country. It does not have emails and cell phone numbers for every house in the US, but it does have a fairly good linkage rate. So they're starting out with pretty good coverage. I believe it's around 80%. And there is a new non-response bias analysis paper on the Census website. There's a really nice household pulse landing page on the Census website. And if you scroll down to the bottom and click technical documentation, I think maybe 2 weeks ago, they added a very nice non-response bias analysis paper to the technical documentation that I believe addresses that issue. So I would direct interested folks to that paper. A second question that was for me was, it spoke about how important it is to coordinate the federal statistical system and how challenging that is. And we had a commenter point out that one of the primary forces to coordinate the Federal Statistical System is the Chief Statistician of the United States, who is typically my boss. And they point out that that position's been vacant since December 2019, and they ask for an update of where that is. So I will start out by wholeheartedly agreeing with you that that is a very important role, and that OMB recognizes the importance of that role and fully intends to fill that position. Obviously, I don't have a specific timeline for you. I would add that Bill Beach, the Commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, has taken on some of the duties of the Chief Statistician on an acting basis, especially where it comes to coordination of the agencies. So we have a statutory council, the Interagency Council on Statistical Policy, which is a council of all of the heads of the 13 principal statistical agencies. And that council is chaired by the Chief Statistician, and Bill Beach has been chairing that council for us in the absence of a full-time Chief Statistician at OMB. So a lot of that, it's not that work and that role of the Chief Statistician is not being done or filled. We've been very lucky to have leaders like Bill step into the gap and provide that kind of leadership for us. So I saw another question that I thought would be a really good one for Linda Young to take, which was, how does the Federal Statistical System expect remote data collection to expand or contract as the pandemic subsides? So as from OMB, I've worked with a lot of the federal statistical agencies, and I won't say this as a bald fact, but to my knowledge, NASS has one of the largest full-time data collection staff of the federal statistical agencies, rather than contract staff, although I'm sure Census and BLS may give them a run for their money. But while we have Linda on here, since this was kind of one of the themes of her presentation was finding new ways to collect data that had previously been collected by field staff, I wonder if you could talk to how you see these changes evolving over time.
Actually, we're quite excited about the possibilities that have arisen from this. One of the biggest things that we have been trying to do is to encourage people to answer by the web more. And fortunately, we had modernized our web data collection instrument for all of our surveys. And so it's still slow, but we're making good progress. The real shock of the pandemic was that all of a sudden we could not have our call centers. We have 5 call centers distributed across the US. We could not have people coming into the call centers, and we could not have our face-to-face interviews. And both of those are big data collection processes for us. So overnight, we began shipping out laptops to the telephone interviewers at their homes and trying to get them set up so that they could collect data for us. And it's been a process, and people through the whole agency, and I'm sure all agencies could say this, everyone in the agency had to pull together for us to continue to meet our mission. And NAS did not miss publishing a single report due to the pandemic. So the transition was extremely rapid and took a great amount of effort. But now the discussion is shifted. Now that we've kind of figured out how to do it, the question comes up, do we really need those 5 brick and mortar buildings for our call centers anymore? The one in St. Louis was particularly large. Do we need to continue to pay for that space? Can we do just as well remotely? The big question we're having on that is whether the review of each of the interviewers' work, because we did have the supervisors listening in and we had some recordings. And so we're trying to get those things in place. If we do, I don't think there's I don't know, but I think there's a strong possibility we'll move away from the brick and mortar for the telephone call centers. I think we'll continue to push harder for the web. And over time, we simply can't afford to continue to collect data for the June area survey as we've had in the past. We can't really afford these face-to-face interviews. We're really optimistic that this approach this year will work, and we can build on that and severely reduce, if not eliminate, those face-to-face interviews, which will, if we can do that and still have quality data, it will be a major success that has largely grown out of this pandemic.
Thank you, Linda. That was a great answer. I am firmly in the camp that there are silver linings to the pandemic that I think will persist. It's going to be hard to put some of these genies back in the bottle, and nor would we want to. So I think you've given us a very good concrete example of how to do that in a way that leverages kind of the existing resources that you have, right? I mean, you have this large staff of call center folks, and you're able to get them laptops, get people working from home, and so it's not it's the sort of thing that takes a lot of creativity, but I think it's possible, and we will see these changes persist. Jennifer, there was another kind of comment / question in the chat that was directed towards you, and so I'd like to flip that to you. You presented about preliminary estimates, and I think preliminary estimates are just fascinating because they bring in a lot of these themes that we've been talking about today, balancing risk, right? I mean, it's preliminary. There's a risk that it's not as accurate, or that you're going to make a large adjustment in the future that casts doubt on the accuracy of the products that you're putting out. There's relevance issues. You're obviously putting this out early because it's important to stakeholders. There may be pressure to get data out more quickly than the agency's comfortable with. It really just ties a lot of these themes together. So I was hoping you could spend a few minutes talking about how you guys at NCHS approach these discussions about whether or not to initiate preliminary advanced release estimates. And then, the question in the chat was specifically geared towards, I think, communicating the error involved with preliminary estimates in a complete way that allows people to judge the fitness for use well. And that's obviously a key part of handling walking these tightropes that we're talking about. So Jennifer, over to you. And if folks, when you're talking, panelists, please turn on your cameras so folks can see you. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Bob. And I think, I don't know if David's still there, but I think he's the person that asked. To take a step back, we've been doing preliminary estimates for a little while with the Health Interview Survey. We put out provisional data for our vital statistics, and we have communications about that. This is, the advanced estimates using the online platforms or the online-based platforms would be a departure from that because it's using a different mechanism for data collection. It's not just releasing data that we are going to be releasing in final form later. That said, like you said, Bob, it's also trying to balance the risks and trying to communicate the fitness for purpose. I see someone wrote that no one's sharing video. I think my video is on. If it's not, let me know, and I'll spend a minute trying to figure that out. But and so we're embarking on some thinking about this. We've been, and I'll say we in the broad sense at NCHS, including our director Brian Moyer. We've been talking to CDC to see what the senior leaders at CDC are interested in. We've also presented some of these ideas to our board of scientific counselors to see, what their reactions are. But it is a challenge to balance it. But even the idea of advanced estimates is broader than we're thinking. Not every estimate needs to be produced early. Some do and some don't. We need to identify which ones would benefit. The most from advanced estimates or the three release system, advanced estimates and then preliminary and then final, but some may not. And those conversations will be with our stakeholders and and others who need that information for policy or for research. We're also working on the communication. It's one thing to have, a PDF online with all of the uncertainty and quality measures painstakingly described. But if no one actually spends time looking at it and they're just looking at a number, then that won't work either. So we need to be able to figure out how to communicate the most salient parts to people. And I think there are different approaches to that. Yeah, and I'll stop there. Bob, do you have a follow-up question to that to guide what I might say next?
No, I think that was a good answer. I don't want to. I guess I don't want to probe, uncomfortably or anything. So I think I think that was a good answer. You did a good job at addressing kind of all of the major themes there. So I appreciate that response. And I will just say, from my end, I think this is generally a good thing and the kind of thing that the stat agencies are doing more of and getting better at. And it really is, to me, it comes down largely to a communication issue. That's something that that all scientific and statistical generators deal with, right? The American Statistical Association deals with everybody. It's like, as we are broadening our suite of products, how do we communicate around quality? We don't have kind of a gold star that we can put on things that are the gold standard official statistics. Yes. So we have to be good at communicating, and it's just a real challenge. So if we have time at the end, I may kind of flip that open again to you and to other panelists to talk about their insights into how we communicate quality in a broader sense now that we're moving away more from only releasing kind of high accuracy, gold standard, large sample surveys. Mm-hmm. But this is a good segue. Actually, I wanted to give Spira a chance to talk a little bit, and to my mind, ERS, the Economic Research Service, is very striking for the breadth of the different kinds of data that you guys handle and analyze and report on and do your economic analyses on. So I think you mentioned the ARM survey, right? So you guys run the full gamut, right? You have a very large scale, high labor intensive, high precision, gold standard data collection. You're also using online panel data. You're using scanner data, credit card data. You're developing an app for people's phones for the food apps. And so all of these different data sources have different quality factors, and some of them can be challenging to work with, but you're linking all of this together. You're creating these blended products. So if you could, appreciate if you could talk a little bit about how you communicate quality in the ecosystem that you work in, where there's such a diverse range of inputs to your analyses.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Yeah, quality is, our typical measure is, how much variation we have in the data. So more observations are better. That's one measure of quality. And when we're doing these online surveys, for example, we tend to focus on response rates. But there are also other aspects that kind of key in here. And we try to pull together enough variation, enough representation in our data so that we can do that causality analysis that John was talking about at the outset. We're not just picking up numbers and reporting, doing the description. We do a lot of that, but we also want to gain some insights. Economists are not very good with solutions. I'll admit up front in a recorded session. But what we are good at is providing insights into relationships. And that's our ultimate goal. So we try to describe the system, the interactions. Whenever I hear someone talk about the unintended consequences of an action, my first response is, well, you just didn't understand the system you were dealing with. So we're trying to articulate that in terms of our models, that we have theory, we have behavior, we collect data, and we mix them with models to try to inform the policy process. Online surveys, we were talking about earlier, they're a nice innovation. They're another part of our toolkit. It adds more balance to our data products. It also provides us some insight into dynamics of decisions of, say, food insecurity. And that can help us promote some better understanding of how changes happen within dynamics of the moment. And so those are some important considerations for us. We have 72 different data products. We spend well over 10% plus of our budget on data acquisition, and we partner with everybody. So we're just data hounds, and we try to get as much of it as we can. We try to fashion it to inform our models and look forward from there.
Great, thank you, Spiro, for your frank response there on working with different kinds of data sets. I see in the chat, John, you had a really interesting comment there about using Bayesian approaches to evaluate the quality of preliminary statistics. It's probably even a broader application than that when it comes to evaluating quality. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your thoughts, and then for an audience like this, it might be nice, not to put you on the spot, but if you have any references, articles, books, that sort of thing that you could recommend to folks, I think that would be interesting. I know I would be interested.
Yeah, I'll cover this just in a brief form here, and there are many potential hours of could be very interesting discussion about this. When I will frequently hear stakeholders have a narrative of, I want this quickly, and perhaps pay less attention to quality, I wonder, and I'll emphasize wonder, this is not a matter of no, whether the following could be a useful way to think about this. We have, based on the combination of our data and what we think we know about a given phenomenon, could be all the types of estimates I was referencing before, but perhaps start with something very simple like total retail sales and the high degree of volatility we saw in those over the past year. You say, tell me about retail sales for a certain month. And you explore further and you say, well, I could tell you this soon, or I could tell you it somewhat later, and perhaps, I think, have better information. And to put that in a Bayesian framework, you can say, well, at a given time, I have a combination of my prior information, the data I currently have available, I produce a posterior distribution, and then I have some type of credible interval or credible set that then I'm saying, I think I am, quote, 95% sure, unquote, that the true total retail sales, or within a given category, was this much last year, or excuse me, last month. Exploring that further, you can say, well, how good is that credible interval? And you can say, I am worried because of the following prospective bias sources if we don't wait long enough. And on the other hand, you have a certain utility that you're delivering to your stakeholder by getting something to them in a given time. If you think about that, you've got a natural set of trade-offs that you're wrestling with as you go along a timeline between presumably getting tighter and better performing posterior distributions and corresponding better performance of your credible interval over time for a nominal 95% coverage, for example. And on the other hand, you may have some kind of deteriorating utility that you may be delivering to your stakeholders by providing the information more slowly. I don't know where to draw the line between those two trade-offs, but to the extent that we could try to characterize those and essentially display them on a so-called ROC curve, it would be very useful to have that so you can at least have a discussion about A, acknowledging there are trade-offs, B, trying to put some kind of structure around the discussion of those trade-offs, and then C, reaching some kind of decision, which statistical agencies and others always have to do, about saying this is about the right place to go ahead and make the decision to publish. When we have predetermined publication schedules, that's something we would need to do a priori as opposed to seeing what happens at a given time, for example, in the middle of a pandemic. And it's worthwhile to think about sensitivity. If you have some shock to the system like a pandemic, under what circumstances would you consider changing your publication schedule, or conversely, changing your quality standards to account for the different trade-offs that you're encountering. So with that, we'll turn things back to Bob.
Thank you, John. That was a lot to chew on, and I think you're right. It probably is the sort of thing that a knowledgeable group of folks could have a really interesting conversation about for several hours. So I am not that person, so I will just continue to chew on those a little bit, and may reach out to you later with some other questions. But for right now, if anyone else has any questions for our panelists, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And aside from that, while you're doing that, I've been keeping a pretty tight set of reins on the panelists, but I want to open it up now. I think we've really hit a couple of major themes around communicating quality, being relevant and timely, kind of innovations from the pandemic that were things that may have been long overdue that you're happy to see, that you hope will persist. I mean, if any of you who didn't get a chance to weigh in on these things but have good examples from your agencies that you want to share, please go ahead and just take the mic and speak up now.
Yeah, I'll offer a remark here on those the relevancy issue to policymakers. At ERS, we've been emphasizing relevance, very aggressively, and part of being relevant is being timely. We don't see it as any conflict with our role to be independent. We're demand-driven. And so we have the independence to articulate what the relevant research questions are. Policymakers come forward and they have a theme. It's building back better from COVID, building back the economy better from COVID. Okay, what's the research question here? That's our role. What kind of data do we need to address this question effectively? So themes are not research questions. And, to our credit, I mean, we should all kind of pat ourselves on the back that we did step up, as you noted, and, our nation needed us to do that. And so, that was a tremendous response to a tremendous challenge that we all faced.
Thank you, Spiro. I was hoping that you would chime in on the relevance issue, because like you said, that has been something that ERS has very notably prioritized throughout their history as a federal statistical agency. And I've always found it interesting from OMB to think about kind of the continuum of services and roles that stat agencies provide, and how that balance differs across stat agencies. I think that's one of the continuums, right? Is the production of kind of raw material data that is released without comment to the public and to others to kind of make what they will out of it. And then on the other end, you have analysis of that data. So analyses that are provided that talk about things like causality and impact. And all of the stat agencies do kind of a mix of those activities, and but the blend differs by agency, certainly. Okay, so back out to the panelists. I don't see any new questions, so I'm gonna do my going once, twice sold. We are nearly out of time, and if I have to give 5 minutes back to folks, I'm sure they won't fault me for it. But I do want to give one last chance to any of the panelists who have anything that they want to add, or to any of our guests who are watching who want to type a question into the chat.
So Bob, I was going to respond a little bit to your call. And I was going to build a little bit on what Spiro said about, themes are not necessarily research questions, but I'm pretty excited because I think that we have spent a lot of time and foundation work to release high quality data. We have a very strong understanding of the data that we release. We are known for being very careful. We are known for producing highly accurate data. And so when we turn our attention to providing perhaps more timely data that we're less sure of, we actually have a pretty good foundation to compare it to. For example, our RAND surveys are fielding identical questions to the National Health Interview Survey, so we can compare side by side, the responses and get a sense of, the quality and the strengths and limitations, in that way. Some of our other modeling efforts moving forward might be perhaps a little more, more quickly done and more automated so that we could produce estimates very quickly. Yet we have a very strong modeling program, so we can compare, those efforts to the efforts that are, more, let's just say, more deliberate and more complete, and really understand what our strengths or what we're gaining and what we're losing, under these new directions. So, I'm pretty enthusiastic. I think it's a great research agenda, and I think it will lead us to both produce new information and also be able to explain that information to the public.
And I'd like to just build on what both Spiro and Jennifer have just said. One of in a way, it's exciting. I don't think we're the only agency that realized we knew we needed to modernize, but we began to feel it in so many ways. And so we're automating data. We're bringing data in from more sources than we ever have. We're using modeling more than we ever have. And so our challenge is to continue in this direction and to reap some of the benefits that we can all see on the horizon. And it is a very exciting time. It's been very stressful. The past year has been stressful, but out of that has arisen a lot of opportunities that I think that the agencies and the nation will benefit from long term.
All right, thank you both. So I'm going to give one last closing thought that both of your comments kind of sparked, and then we can call it a day, I think. But it kind of struck me as I was listening to you that when we talk about timeliness and relevance and innovating, that there has been, I'm sure most of the folks on the panel and most of the attendees here are familiar with kind of the rise of data science, right? So I was thinking about that as you guys were talking, because that was really, that's kind of the theme of a lot of the data science going on across the federal government, is that they are using innovative sources of data to come up with very quick, very policy relevant insights. And we at OMB and Office of the Chief Statistician have spent a lot of time navel gazing about what data science means, how it relates to federal statistics, and what are their respective roles. And I would just say that what I think I have seen over the last couple of years, and probably accelerated during the pandemic, is a bit of a convergence of the way that kind of classical statisticians and data scientists are approaching problems. I think that the data science folks have gotten more interested and careful about considering things like bias and the not just predicting, but also understanding better the processes that are generating data. And then conversely, the statisticians have gotten better about embracing kind of wild data sources and figuring out how to integrate them. And so I think that this convergence of these two fields is really promising, and it's been very interesting. And I definitely see a future where these things are kind of gradually merging into a much more diverse field that is both, innovative and quick, but also is understanding very well how to communicate and measure things like uncertainty. So I also have very high hopes for the future. Like I said, it's been exciting to see that the way that the stat agencies have stepped into the breach during the pandemic and been able to produce such value and really demonstrate their flexibility and value to the country during times of crisis. So I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us and also for their leadership roles in this really impressive response that we've been talking about. So with that, I will thank you all. I don't know, Jeff, if you had any closing words you wanted to offer on behalf of the Washington Statistical Society, but if not, I just want to thank you again for organizing and setting this up, and thanks to everyone who was able to attend.
Yeah, just a quick note. I do want to thank you, Bob, for doing a fantastic job chairing and moderating the session. Also, Spiro, John, Linda, and Jennifer for participating. I did want to alert everyone of the next Washington Statistical Society event. The topic of online surveys did come up today, but Adam Safir and Laura Earhart from the Consumer Expenditure Surveys at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics will be presenting on some of their work on developing and testing an online diary survey. This seminar event is joint with DC APOR, and it's in memory and honor of a very close colleague and friend to many of us, Jennifer Edgar. It's next Wednesday, the 28th at 12:30. So if you can, please come and attend that seminar. Details are in the chat log, and you could go to the Washington Statistical Society website to view those details. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you.
Well, and perhaps we can all add hearty thanks both to Bob and Jeff as well.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you all.